Well, second album we're going to be covering from the band Pulp.
Hmm.
We've dipped our toe in quite a bit of Oasis, quite a bit of Blur, a little bit of Suede, right along the way,
Yep.
and Elastica, and now we're going to come back to another staple of Britpop. Although by this time, I think '98, right? Britpop kind of is on its way out, right? So these are just
Hmm.
these are just bands at this point, no longer a scene, I think, as much from my understanding of Britpop. But this is hardcore. I was surprised, Josh, because all the songs I know from Pulp, there's only one song, Help the Aged, that I recognized from this one. And that was always one that, if I'm being very honest, was not one of the songs I revisited. On the first experience I had with Pulp was a greatest hits album of their
Okay.
tracks. Yeah, and so not the way I usually consume a
Yeah,
band.
that's more of a matte direction.
More, I
I
was
was
about to
gonna
say
say.
more matte consumption style, but it just so there were certain bands that it was sort of like there was only so much you could listen to, right? And
Hmm.
so every once in a while, like if I wasn't sure if I was going to like a band, a friend would just give me a greatest hits and just kind of say, just check it out and see what you think. And Pulp is one that stands out, on that one. I think I'm trying to think of like other bands I first consumed in greatest hits for. Like Steve Miller Band was
Mm.
one. Not that I like Steve Miller Band, but definitely their greatest hits, right? Was I know Matt said that he consumed like Creedence Clearwater Revival in that Chronicle album, and
Hmm.
I can definitely remember listening to that early in my CCR, but I'd heard enough of their songs on the radio and just, in
Yeah.
my dad's universe that yeah, there was some I got from like I wasn't listening like Green River, right? You know what I
Right.
mean, or Willie and the Po' Boys, but like I think we even joked at the time. I'm like I felt like I had because I knew all these songs, right?
Right.
So, but Pulp is definitely one I remember from a greatest hits album, and yeah, this one did not have those hits. What'd you think of this one? A lot different than the other Pulp album we covered, huh?
Yeah, that's true. And Pulp, interestingly, as I said in the to you guys in a text earlier, that
And we covered his and hers, by the way,
yeah,
for people that are yeah.
no, we covered different
Or,
class.
or a different class. I'm sorry.
Yep.
We should have covered
Um,
his and hers. That's a great album. Yep.
I was gonna say like the compilation for this band kind of makes sense because they don't really have that many albums, and then they have a huge break kind of like coming up after this, where they didn't put any new material out. But um, I I love this album. I think I kind of I was positive on different class, but maybe not as high in retrospect as I should have been. This is where it kind of clicked into place for me, I think, for this band, and kind of demonstrated what was special about them. They're leaning full into like the glam aspect now, I think, on this album, which I'm all for.
I don't know, man. The glam. I actually think the glam aspect was more on the last album,
You
different
think so?
class.
Okay, well
Yeah, well,
maybe.
like a song like Disco 2000
Oh,
is
sure.
like yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I feel like this is leaning also into Bowie, obviously, as well. I really picked up on the really sharp songwriting that Jarvis Cocker brings to the songs. There's some really kind of like funny, incisive lyrics, especially on a song like "Help the Aged" and "A Little Soul" and "I'm a Man." Um, the strong lyrics are throughout on this album. The more I listened to it and paid attention to that, I think they just have a real knack for writing catchy songs that really fit in, are right in my lane in terms of like pop sensibility mixed with like interesting kind of moody uh, guitar and synth and um, this like I don't know like 90s sheen, but taking like a kind of backward facing look at kind of the glam period. There was no weak songs on this album. I guess the only song I didn't like that much was Seductive Berry, but that's more because it was like a long song, and um, I like parts of that as well. Um, the every song there's really no weak songs on here. I like the standout tracks for me include "I'm a Man," "Sylvia," Help the Aged, Party, The Fear, pretty much like every other song I really liked a lot. And I liked the songs in between as well. What else do I like about this? Not to Jarvis Cocker's fault, but this often reminded me of Jermaine Clement from Flight of the Conchords and some of their parody songs. He has kind of the same voice as him, and so like that kept popping into my head unfairly. But that was just more of like a funny coincidence, more than anything else. I don't know. This is just kind of like what I'm looking for in like 90s pop. I can see why too this band might be like influential later down the line with a lot of like dance, like synth pop bands. I feel like they're probably taking a lot from influence from this band. And yeah, those are kind of like the standouts for me. What did you think of this album, not knowing it as well?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite as high on it as you are. As I sort of led on a little bit earlier, I was higher on Different Class, and certainly an album like His and Hers that I go back on like is another album I like a little bit better, I think, than this one. Let's go with the strengths to start, though. The songwriting's excellent. Laugh out loud, funny at times, introspective. Yes. Jarvis Cocker really has a gift as a lyricist. It's what has always drawn me to Pulp a little bit, in that he writes some of the best slice of life songs that you could write. He also writes great sort of biting songs. Like
yes.
Help the Aged's a really, really funny song. Like it's just about, growing old and, not being as cool as you think, and what constitutes being age, right? When you kind of you're sort of like you're living too fast a little bit. Like there's that funny thing when it's like funny how it all falls away. When did you realize it's time you took an older lover, baby? Teach you stuff although he's looking rough, which made me laugh. Yeah. So it's a very like self-loathing song. You don't know if he's writing about himself, if he's writing about someone he knows, or if the answer is like yes, right? Like both, right at the time, which is what I really appreciate about him. You never know what's autobiographical and what's observational, right? Which is a cool thing that he does. So lyrics, if we're breaking stuff down, right? Lyrics A+ across this excellently. The tracks I like on this album, I like a lot, and especially the back end of this album I like a little bit more than the front end. Like songs like A Little Soul, I'm a Man, Sylvia, Glory Days, I like all of those songs. And and Like a Friend, the closer, I also like quite a bit. So those are all songs that really spoke to me. I did find the first half of the album a little bit plodding, I'm not gonna lie. Okay. It was a little bit ponderous at times. While the lyrics were good musically, it didn't really catch my attention. This is hardcore. I know what they were going for, but it was like a little too precious for me, I think, in terms of the presentation. There is a little bit of a lyrical theme on this album that feels like youth lost and celebrity culture, I would say, especially like voyeuristic, like plastic celebrity culture. I know this is a time where like Jarvis Cocker had like a really difficult like relationship with fame, and you kind of can tell that on this album, because whereas the two albums previous to this, he's largely writing about like slice of life English songs, right? Like love songs, coming of age songs, nostalgia, commentary, like, but it's kind of grounded in that same thing that the Kinks did, or even kind of what Blur does at times, right? Like writing about the scene. This doesn't feel quite as like British or quaint. This feels big, like big societal questions, big feel. I think that's where you're getting some of the glam from, like the sound they're going. This whole album is big, and on the difference between how it's big on this one compared to the big on, the previous album, Different Class, is like Different Class gave you like the Disco 2000 is this big, like exactly what it sounds like disco beat, where, he's talking pretty much about like, a crush of his, you know, getting older, and
Hmm.
she got married, and like it's a nostalgia track, right? But and like what if we look back at, what if we look back in the year 2000, right? Like where are we? And sort of for ease and whiz was this like big song, but it's like a drug song. There was some parody songs, like Pencil Skirt was almost like lecherous, right?
Hmm.
Common People was kind of sneering, at the time. Live Bed Show was like a funny parody of like a sex song, right? There's just all these different a Feeling Called Love, right, was like a really broad song. But that was the album that I felt was a little bit more glammy.
Hmm.
Campy, but with the eye firmly, winking at you.
Hmm.
This one felt heavier to me, and
Hmm.
it wasn't bad, but it definitely required multiple listens before I kind of figured out, you know, how I felt about it.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, the reason this one's a little bit lower for me is I could pick up different class and his and hers and listen to them tomorrow, right? There's just tracks that I enjoy, and there's a variety on it, right? That doesn't make it feel quite as heavy to me. I don't mind heavy, but with Pulp Sound, especially the first half of this album, I did find myself beaten down by it a little bit, and it kind of got drawn back in the second half of the album a
Hmm.
little bit because they did tempo change a little bit. But yeah, once again, thumbs up, but I won't say disappointed. Just a version of the band that didn't quite resonate with me as much as sort of the. If today we talked about Oasis and I was like, oh, the Be Here Now version of them resonates more than the, you know, Supersonic and Wonderwall version of it, I almost feel ironically the exact opposite here. Like the Disco 2000s and Babies and Razzmatazz Pulp has a little bit more for me than maybe, this version.
Hmm.
So
Gotcha.
that's kind of where I stand. I would be fascinated to see what Matt thought about this one.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
did.
know.
Yeah. I didn't feel the heaviness on this album. I felt,
Really? Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
I felt, I think just kind of, I really locked into kind of just the glam nature, and I think
And
that just
maybe I'm
carried
wrong.
me.
Maybe there's a
I don't know.
heaviness that I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
It felt a little dark to me at times, I have to say.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, that could be due to his writing too. I mean,
mhm.
he is writing about some like a little soul. Is this, like you said, it's funny, is
Yeah.
he like writing about his child and like how he doesn't want his child, everyone's saying the child looks like me, but I don't want him, he should not be like me, or else like is he just writing this as like, you
Right. And
know,
whereas like on the other albums he would write that and there'd be a little bit of like, oh, that's disappointing, but a little bit of a laugh, and he'd be
yeah,
bring you up, that like English self-loathing. This one just felt like a heavier version of that question, I guess.
yeah,
Is just how I heard it. Once again, I could be wrong on this, and there could be that, but like a song like "This Is Hardcore" is clearly talking about fame, right? And like kind of that almost like casting couch sort of like pornography type of
mm-hmm,
view of women in stardom. Like what does fame look like, right?
yeah,
When you're a star, but you're a star in this area that might not have legitimacy. It was not like a depressing dark song, but like there was there wasn't the there weren't the escapes, I think, for me. Flight of Fancy type songs, or out loud funny songs. Like I smiled and even chuckled at some of the songs along the way, but almost despite myself, I'd say.
hmm, okay,
Yeah. But once again, it's all how you hear it, right? And so um but like a song like Sylvia, which I really liked, once again, that, and please stop asking what it's got to do with you. On other Pulp albums, right? I kind of would have laughed because it would have been a comment about like like being, up your own ass a little bit and stuff.
mm-hmm,
But here it just read more kind of like sad and disconnected to me. I don't know. I'd be curious to see what Jarvis Cocker himself's headspace was. Did you read anything about like the production
no, I
going into
didn't,
this album?
no,
Now, yeah, now I'm curious to see I'm curious to see like what it, like I said, I know he was definitely like struggling with fame around this time, but I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, we got
sure,
a little bit of time here. I'll indulge a little bit. Let's see what they were saying.
One
So
thing I noticed, you mentioned that track Like a Friend, which ends
mhm.
the album. However, I did not listen to that song because it's not listed in the track listing for um on Wikipedia as part of the original
Well,
album, but it is
I
on
might be onto something.
it is on deluxe releases, and
Okay.
on All Music it says it's on the album. So I'm not sure. I was trying to like figure out what was going on with that track because it's,
Uh,
at least on Amazon, it shows as like
mhm.
clearly like the most popular song on this album.
Which
So I
song?
don't, Like a Friend. So
Okay.
again, maybe it appeared somewhere in media, which
Yeah.
boosted it. But yeah,
Well, I might be on to something here, Josh.
okay,
And I did not read about this ahead of time, but going into this album, Russell Senior left the band. He was a longtime member, and he was considered to be like one of the big motivators of their previous sound. And his quote was, "It wasn't creatively rewarding to be in Pulp anymore." Oof, okay, it's a
okay,
little rough. This album took a long time to record, and Jarvis Cocker was battling a cocaine addiction and the breakup of a long-term relationship.
okay,
And uh, this is a theme album, Josh. It's about uh, disillusionment with fame.
okay. Interesting.
And the critics universally describe this album as much darker and more challenging than that of previous
Okay.
albums. So, yeah, I'm not saying I'm right, but I will admit that I'm a little surprised that like that vibe didn't get through to you a little bit because I did feel it was a pretty dark album.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know. Um,
yeah, it was well regarded though.
yeah.
People really enjoyed it, but it sort of is like sort of like they a lot of the British critics I'm reading here sort of seem like they felt this album was like a rejection of Britpop,
Hmm.
but I
Okay.
think for Jarvis Cocker it seems like it was a little bit more complicated than that. You know what I mean? Like yes, it might, but I think it was as much his personal narrative as it was like I want to be out of Britpop, right?
Hmm.
So, but who knows? But that's a little bit of what was going on there. Here's another interesting thing: the next album
Hmm.
that they did in 2001, We Love Life, the uh, producer of that album won Scott Walker.
Oh, oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I saw that. I was like, wow, that, you know, an interesting, yeah. He replaced the producer of this album. Chris Thomas produced This Is Hardcore. So.
Interesting.
Yep, and it was their last album for 2 decades until the one that's going to be released this week, Josh.
That's amazing.
Pretty crazy, huh?
Hmm.
So, but yeah, I don't want to sound like I enjoyed this album, but it was a different type of listen, a good listen, but maybe not quite as enjoyable for me as some of like what I consider to be the prime pulp.
Hmm.
So,
Yep.
all right.